I'll give people just another minute because there's a lot of people joining right now. And thank you to everyone for joining us this afternoon. I know it's beautiful outside. We're excited to talk about rain gardens. It's a perfect topic for this weather. So today, we are joined by Nicole Davis, Save the Sounds Watershed Project Manager, and Lys Gant, Save the Sounds Watershed Stewardship Coordinator, and Claire Armstrong. Claire is a junior at Common Ground High School working with the UConn Natural Resource Conservation Academy Conservation Ambassador Program. She's been looking at the benefits of rain gardens as a solution to localized flooding and working with us, helping to spread the word about Save the Sounds Rain Garden program. So we're really glad to have her helping present the program today. Um, with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over. Oh, one more thing, actually a little housekeeping I'll add is if you have any questions as we go along, as you're thinking of them, please feel free to put them in chat. We will get to questions at the end. We'll cover the ones that are in chat, and then if time remains, we'll also just have open discussion. So go ahead and put any questions in the chat, and with that, I'll turn it over to Nicole, Lys, and Claire. Thanks.
Folks, thanks for joining us today. Anne already gave a really great introduction, so I'm not going to say a whole lot about this, but we are here to talk about our rain garden program. Lys and I are not advancing slides. There we go. Lys and I are part of Save the Sounds ecological restoration team, right? No good presentation goes without a hitch. And we've had the opportunity over the last few months to work with Claire and kind of indoctrinate her into the really fun part of rain gardens. We are the part of Save the Sound that does most of the on-the-ground projects. And Lys and I spend most of our time thinking about stormwater and plants and how we can improve water quality based on land-based solutions. So we're going to start today, not where you would think with a rain garden presentation, but we're going to talk about the Long Island Sound watershed because it may not seem obvious right now, but this really is the whole impetus of all the work and why what we're doing is so important. So most people think about the Long Island Sound watershed as the coast that's on Long Island Sound, maybe parts of Long Island and coastal Connecticut. But the Long Island Sound watershed is actually quite large. It's a 16,000 square mile watershed that actually starts in Canada. And the reason that that is so important is because whatever we do on land impacts what happens in the water. So if you're in Vermont or New Hampshire, or the center of Massachusetts, or anywhere in the state of Connecticut or parts of southern New York, what you're doing is impacting what happens in Long Island Sound. And the reason for that is because we live in a watershed. And so no matter where on earth you're standing, you are standing in a watershed. Water is what connects us, right? And so every piece of land in the United States and the continental US and the world drains to a body of water. Puddles have watersheds, streams have watersheds, rivers have watersheds, lakes have watersheds, oceans have watersheds. And so the work that we're doing is really to kind of make that connection that just because you're not on a river or on a stream, what happens where you're standing matters to the water quality in Long Island Sound. So every 2 years, the state of New York and the state of Connecticut put together what's called the Integrated Water Quality Report, which identifies impaired water bodies. And so what this map is showing you, in Connecticut, the yellow lines are any body of water that's been assessed by the state and isn't meeting water quality standards. So in Connecticut, that means of the 85 watersheds that have been assessed, right, the regional water bodies, 44% have impairments. And that's a lot of water that is impaired. And in New York, I don't have the statistics, but it's really the same idea. There's a lot of impaired water bodies. And if you can see my cursor, this area here is roughly the Long Island Sound watershed. So there's a lot of water bodies that aren't meeting water quality standards. And we have had tremendous successes over the past several decades to improve what happens at sewage treatment plants, what happens with our wastewater, what happens with municipal stormwater and industrial waste. So the biggest problem plaguing these watersheds is what's called non-point source pollution, or more simply, stormwater runoff. And the reason for that is all of this water that hits the ground when it rains carries contaminants with it. And they're not obvious things. They're not things that you see, right? We've all seen slicks of oil within a puddle, and we know that that's a contaminant. But what we don't think about is the things in our yard that are making its way to water bodies, the things that are on our roads. I want anyone here to think about if you've ever changed a tire. When you take that tire off, your hands are black and gritty, your brakes are black and gritty, and all of that gunk that's coming off of your tire and your brake dust in the underside of your car are all making its way into our water bodies. And so that's why the work that we're doing is so important. We're rethinking about how stormwater is managed. So rather than in paved areas, all of that stormwater making its way to the nearest catch basin, going through a pipe into the nearest river and stream, we're thinking about how we can keep that in the ground and get it to infiltrate into the ground more naturally. And that's really the focus of what our rain garden program is. It's really to kind of address those non-point source impairments, that stormwater runoff that's carrying all of the contaminants from our yards and our streets, the trash, and the things that we don't see into our water bodies. And so what that means is an urban environment, and that's really even suburbs, any developed area that we're in where most of our houses are, there's a lot of what's called impervious pavement. That's roofs and sidewalks and driveways. And so how can we think about getting that water into a green space rather than getting it off into the road? And so I'm going to turn it over to Claire to talk about what a rain garden is and why that's so important.
Well, this is my introduction to rain gardens, and we could keep going to the next slide. As Nicole mentioned earlier, impervious surfaces are surfaces made with water-resistant materials such as asphalt, which prevents water from infiltrating into the ground naturally. This leads to runoff, which carries the pollutants, to storm drains, which eventually makes their way all over the world in streams, lakes, rivers, and the ocean. Some everyday impervious surfaces are the roads, sidewalks, driveways, parking lots, roofs, and patios. Compacted soil also is an impervious surface, and unfortunately, when people are walking where they shouldn't be or hiking, ground that would normally be able to infiltrate soil becomes pretty much useless. Rain gardens are person-made gardens used to reduce localized flooding and pollution in an area. These rain gardens are dug lower than the surrounding ground, about 6 inches, to collect excess water runoff from surfaces like roofs, patios, and roads. Specific native plants are moisture tolerant and used to help brighten the landscape and provide resistance to the local climates so that these rain gardens can last longer and do their jobs. This particular example I'm very fond of because it's very beautiful, and when I first pictured rain gardens, I thought they were kind of ugly, honestly, but gardens like these can be like implemented in residential areas and people can care for them and maintain their garden and enjoy the space as well. And basically, the depth of a rain garden allows the water to pond in the depression and be used by the vegetation and soil in evapotranspiration, as well as infiltration into soil. The stormwater soaks into the ground instead of flowing into storm drains or flowing into surface waters, which can cause erosion, water pollution, flooding, and diminished groundwater. This is a more detailed example that shows that the rain garden has to be at least 10 feet from the foundation to prevent flooding and damage to the house. And the water spout's water is directed towards the rain garden instead of onto roads or sidewalks or driveways, which will lead to more runoff. And the deep-rooted plants help to increase absorption. These rain gardens can benefit more than just the environment. They actually assist in mental health, as rain gardens can generate many positive emotions such as calmness, joy, and creativity, which can facilitate concentration. Nature connectedness is also associated with lower levels of poor mental health, particularly lower depression and anxiety, which all can benefit the quality of your life overall. And then their environmental impact is they help to filter out pollutants and runoff and provide food and shelter for butterflies, songbirds, and other wildlife. They help to prevent flooding and therefore protect other habitats from damage by the weather, and they reduce the amount of pollutants reaching creeks and streams. Many organizations are involved in installing rain gardens in Connecticut, but a more prominent one in New Haven is Save the Sound. They work towards a goal of decreasing flooding due to runoff and heavy rains. These rain gardens have to be installed at least 10 feet from the foundation of a property, which makes it difficult to install in New Haven because of how close houses tend to be to one another. So, but we're always looking for spaces with residential property that would have like large land in their yards. And then Save the Sound has been working with homeowners and their neighbors to install rain gardens all along the neighborhoods of Edgewood, Beaver Hills, West River, The Hill, Dixwell, New Hallville, Hamden. And I worked with them to install rain gardens in Hamden. During a site assessment, you can note the types of plants in the area, the quality of the soil, positioning of the roads, walkways, and driveways, and sidewalks. It's important to check where the water spouts end and whether or not they go directly onto impervious surfaces. The rain gardens must be 10 feet, I say again, just because this is a very important note, from the foundation in order to prevent flooding and foundation compromises. Depending on how you get a rain garden installed, it can be completely free. I'm actually going to ask Nicole to take it from here real quick. I'm having some troubles with my Chromebook. Sorry, Nicole.
Nope, no problem, Claire. And so what we did with Claire was we went out and talked to neighbors, which is how we reach most of the rain garden recipients that we've had. We found that kind of walking around neighborhoods and talking to homeowners seems to be the most effective. And we walked her through how to assess a property. And kind of the big piece was teaching her how to plan a rain garden and design one. And so the other piece, 10 feet away from the foundation, is the key element. The second piece is to make sure that it's a proportion of the roof area. So we design our gardens to be sized how much water is going to be there. And if Claire is back and ready, I'll let her talk through the design process. All right.
Thank you. So first off, when we measure the roof, we're trying to estimate how much water from the roof the rain garden is going to be taking in and like working towards infiltrating. So that impacts the depth of the rain garden, and the types of plants we put into the rain garden often depend on what the landowner wants in residential areas. And I know we worked with one person who wanted red and orange because their husband wanted it that way. Like those were the colors they liked. So those were the plants we focused on. And we try to space the plants 2 feet from each other and keep the species grouped together so that they can survive and compete properly. And then we have different levels of plants. We have grasses and brush and bushes and flowers. And all of these different levels help to create shade for each other and just promote a more healthy growing environment. And the positioning of the rain garden from the foundation is often relevant with the direction the land is going. So if it's a slightly sloped, we want to put the rain garden right where the slope is going down so that more water can infiltrate into the garden. And I think that's all for designing. We also look for properties with like their spouts that go towards like impervious surfaces already so that we can redirect those water spouts in order to prevent more runoff.
Thanks, Claire. And we're going to hand it over to Lys, who's going to talk through all the nuances of the program that we're running right now.
Thank you so much, Claire. Claire's been a pleasure to work with. I am sure Nicole can attest to that as well. And thank you for that intro to rain gardens. I'm going to dive into kind of the intricacies of Save the Sounds process, but also kind of just a general idea of what the process is for sussing out if you have a space that works to put in a rain garden. So Save the Sounds process is kind of involved before we even get to the part where we're putting the garden literally in the ground. There's a bunch of steps that have to come in advance of that just to ensure that we're doing due diligence, making sure that the garden is going to do the job that it's intended to do. So first we do the site assessment, which Claire touched upon, and I'll get into more detail on that in later slides. But that site assessment is generally looking at the property and assessing where various things of importance are. In addition to that, we're going to be taking a look at soil infiltration, which I will also touch on in later slides. Next, after that site assessment step and infiltration test, we're going to move on to sizing, which there are many resources that I will share with you all about how to properly calculate your roof area to determine how big your garden needs to be to appropriately infiltrate the amount of water you're trying to infiltrate. Third, usually, is purchasing materials, arranging for tools, ordering plants, and coordinating plant delivery if needed. Fourth, and in my opinion, most important step is making sure that you contact Call Before You Dig, which is a simple 811 call. There's also an online platform. It's a super easy process. You must do it, because we've had situations where, like, we'll get to a property, we've done Call Before You Dig, and even the Call Before You Dig, like, the pipe is like 6 inches closer to the space than we are anticipating. So at least with this, you've done your job, your diligence of reporting to Call Before You Dig that you're going to put a shovel in the ground. And that absolutely is a non-negotiable. Like, that should absolutely happen before you ever put a shovel in the ground, just for your own safety and peace of mind. Yeah. Next slide for me. Awesome. And then once you have this wonderful plan put together, you've contacted Call Before You Dig, you're ready to get plants in the ground, and then you go, okay, I need some help. Because it's an involved process. It's a process that requires a lot of manual labor and a lot of work. So we recruit volunteers, friends, neighbors, sometimes other staff members. And step 6, the best step, installation, which when we do the process is a kind of full day ordeal usually. But it's really wonderful to see how we can go from a grassy lawn to an amazing rain garden that's infiltrating stormwater within a usually 6-hour period. So, as Claire mentioned, there are a lot of steps that are in the process for rain garden siting, and I'm going to kind of go step by step now to guide you guys through those steps in case you decide to put a rain garden in at your own home. So, infiltration testing. First of all, why do we do infiltration testing? Infiltration testing is important because you need to ensure that the soil you're putting a garden into has the right materials within it to allow the water to soak into the ground within a 24-hour period. It needs to go from wet soil right after a rain to completely dry within 24 hours. That's the most important, because if you don't have that, you're going to have water that stands for a long period of time, which can cause a host of issues. So there's a few ways you can go about it. First, you're going to want to dig a 6-inch deep hole. There's what we call quick and dirty method, which I'll get into the differences in a second. And then there's the technical way. The quick and dirty method, you fill the hole with water, you let it drain. If it's dry within 24 hours, you could repeat the process just to see what the soil does when it's fully saturated. Which it gives us we have a little grace in New Haven and Hamden especially, to do that. And I'll explain why. So New Haven and Hamden, the soil has a very, very high sand content. So in those areas specifically, we have overwhelmingly very high infiltration rates, which means that the water goes from surface level to into the groundwater layer, is no longer visible in that depressed space within far quicker than 24 hours, frankly. Nicole, I think you have the exact metric for numbers, but it's very, very quick. And what that allows for us to do is kind of assume that if we're looking at the soil and the soil is uniformly sandy with just that little bit of organic matter to keep your plants healthy, you're going to have a high infiltration rate. However, just for your due diligence, we recommend doing it the technical way, which is you dig that hole, you fill it with water, lay a shovel over the top, measure the water level at the base of the shovel handle without touching anything, come back every 15 minutes or so and measure how fast that drops, and measure it until it's dry. And that will give you a good sense of what the infiltration rate of your soil is. So once you have done your infiltration, we're going to do the rain garden site assessment. So we are lucky in the fact that we created an application to be able to record all this data so that we have it for any grants that we need to have this data recorded for. But some of the important things that we take away from this assessment are, first of all, locating the downspouts that are connected to your house and noting whether or not they are free flowing or connected to a pipe. And when I say free flowing, the difference between that and a connected pipe is a connected pipe generally is going into a sewer system. That is one of the main things we're looking for, Save the Sound, when we are looking at properties for our 319 funding. We love to see connected pipes because it means that it is a great thing to disconnect and move that from being connected directly to the sewer system into a rain garden to infiltrate. Free flowing would be a downspout that flows directly onto an impermeable surface. Another thing we're looking for with these site assessments are whether or not the homeowner has water and moisture in the basement. The reason we look for that is because that tells us that there is some sort of infrastructural weakness in the foundation. And so normally where we would err on the side of 10 feet from the foundation, we will kind of bump that out to at least 15 feet just to make sure that we are not doing anything to further undermine the integrity of the foundation. We look for utilities like gas meters, if we see any conduits, stuff of that sort, any existing gardens and trees, all things that would interfere with the installation of the garden itself. So we take a look at the property and we identify, can you just go back a bit? Thank you. We identify areas in the yard where the garden could work. We're looking for relatively flat, approximately 30 feet from the down, or less than 30 feet from the downspout. And that's just more of a logistical thing. It's easier if it's less than 30 feet. But more than 10 feet from the foundation, we take note of light conditions, sunny, shady, is it a combination of everything? We measure all of the potential areas of interest. We note the size of the downspout. Average usually is 2 to 3 inch or 3 to 4 inch, but sometimes people have odd sized downspouts. And then we identify location for soil and grass removed because you're going to be taking quite a bit of material out of this excavated area to put in your garden. You need somewhere to put the soil afterwards. Other considerations, and the first one is definitely a safety consideration for sure. We want to stay at least a foot off of walkways and at least 24 inches away from driveways. And that's just so that you don't fall into your garden. We don't want it to become a safety hazard. So for that reason, we generally err on having a bit of a buffer around the garden space. If there's a slope, the low edge can be elevated with a berm. And what that does is it prevents the garden from overflowing in a heavy storm event. It keeps that water kind of sequestered into the garden space. And then if there is garden overflow, which sometimes happens if it's a very large scale rain event, where is the water going to go? So is there going to be any harm to your property, your house, etc., if the garden does overflow? You want to make sure that whatever is downhill can get wet. So when we're looking at the roof and downspout area, right now you're looking at an aerial view of a home. We want to locate the downspouts. So Nicole, if you can click next, it highlights those. When we're looking at the roof, water flows away from the roof's peaks towards each downspout, so that can give us an idea of about how much space we're going to need to be infiltrating. And then multiple downspouts will flow to splits in the middle. So then you can kind of determine from this approximately how much roof area you're working with. Go ahead and click, Nicole. It'll show the highlighted area. So once you have that information in hand, it can kind of guide you in approximately how much garden space you're going to need to infiltrate that area of roof. Now, I can't take credit for developing this amazing tool. I wish I could. It's the greatest thing since sliced bread, honestly. This is a tool provided by UConn. It's called CT Nemo sizing tool, and it essentially allows you to look up your address, estimate the roof area, which you would have determined from what you saw on the previous slide, which is picking a downspout and the area you're going to put the garden. And it allows you, it basically does the equation for you to determine, based on the amount of roof area, how much garden you need to infiltrate that much roof area. So the example here is a rooftop that was measured at approximately 973 square feet. And based on the calculation, the suggested rain garden size is 162 square feet. You can also do this using Google Maps, but you would need to do the calculation yourself, which is a relatively easy calculation. Essentially, to determine depth of a rain garden, you're going to be doing a little bit of a math here. So I hope that you guys did well in your high school math classes. So when you're looking at the square footage of a garden, you're going to take the square footage of roof area and you're going to divide it by the ponding depth of the garden. Typical for our installations is 6 to 8 inches. We generally don't go much over 8 inches unless we absolutely need to, because our excavations are hand dug. So it adds an additional kind of logistical piece. If we're going over 8 inches, it makes the install quite a bit harder. We have dug trenches before by hand, and it's ill-advised. But basically, you're going to take that roof area and divide it by, let's say you're doing a 6-inch depth garden. You're going to divide, say, your 300 by 6, and then the solution to that, you're going to find the approximate square foot area of how much space you need for your rain garden. This is kind of a cross section of what a garden should look like. So when you're digging your garden space, you want to keep in mind the fact that you need 6 inches of ponding depth for infiltration, but you're also going to be factoring in the fact that you're going to have a thick mulch layer in place as well to ensure that your plants have enough moisture to properly establish once they're planted. So when it comes to plant selection, there are some considerations to take. Native plants are best suited for rain gardens, and that's because native plants are adaptable. We let light conditions guide our plant choices most of the time. Some of the things we also factor in, though, when we're looking at plant choices are bloom time, because we want to make sure that there's kind of color throughout the seasons, if you will. You can look at plants with regards to the plant shape. You can make your garden look more wild and meadowy. You can make it look very organized. And this is all things that will change what your preferential plant choices are. You can also look at, You could also, we suggest planning based on, can you go back one slide? Sorry. You can also plan, we also suggest you plan based on the full grown plant size. Most plants, when you get them, are in like a little 1 gallon pot, let's say. Most plants get quite a bit larger than what fits in a 1 gallon pot. Honestly, very quickly. Sometimes within a growing season, they'll double in size. So that's just something to keep in mind. I am working on a database that gives information on various plant needs, but also gives information on height and spread of plants. But when it comes to plants, my biggest suggestion is be creative and always have like a backup to a backup available, because sometimes your plant's not available at any given time in the season, or it's not going to work in your particular location or with the sun needs that it has. So that's all something to keep in mind when you're selecting plants. Go ahead, Nicole. These are some of the more common plants that we utilize in our gardens. And these are just some prime examples of really hardy, really adaptable plants that are great in rain gardens. But as I mentioned, we have a full list that I'm working on that has a variety of plants for all different sunlight needs, soil needs, etc., that are all really great in rain gardens. So we are finally to the installation step. And there's a bit that goes into day of when we're doing installation. So we do some site prep, which is we roughly mark out the area of the garden using spray paint. Once that is completed and we know what area we're going to be excavating, we start removing and relocating the sod. And there's a really important reason why we do that, which I will touch on in a bit. But especially if you have a berm that you're going to need because your rain garden is going to be seated in a slope, you want to make sure that you're saving that sod. And so we do this thing called grubbing, which is essentially we take a shovel, we stick it underneath the grass, and we flip the like clods of dirt and grass up onto themselves. And what that does is it kind of keeps it as this like mat of grass that will very quickly reestablish a root system and kind of secures itself to the ground and other clods of grass to make a really intact berm for our needs. Once that is done, we've removed all the sod, it's set aside for our needs, we start digging. So first we dig down within a like 1 foot set in from the edge, 6 inches deep. We have to figure out where we're dispersing the soil to around the site, which within the assessment process we would have determined. And what we do at that point is once we're down to a flat 6 inches in that inner circle, we start assessing the outer circle, let's say. So what we'll do is we'll cut in at an angle to meet that 6-inch depth so that we have a nice gradual slope from the outermost edge down to the level bottom. We want to make sure that the bottom of our rain garden is a bathtub. We don't want it to have a deep end and a shallow end. We're not making a swimming pool. We want it to be completely level across the bottom. And the reason that is because we want the water when it comes into the garden to have an opportunity to evenly infiltrate throughout the entirety of that bottom area. What would happen if it was more of a pool was you would have it all sloping to one end, and then it would be an increased likelihood of eventually it overflowing. We want a stone splash pad, which is essentially where the downspout eventually makes its way into the garden. Sometimes we do bury the connection. We'll use like a 4-inch PVC pipe. And if we need to bury that downspout leader, we'll dig like a trench that follows the pathway of that PVC all the way to the downspout that we're going to disconnect, which is a little more involved than just laying a line of like downspout itself. We lay out our plants, we get our plants in the ground, we mulch, we disconnect the downspout, and then we give the garden a light watering. just to make sure it's got a good start for the season. A lot of these we're doing installs in like late spring, early summer, which, you know, weather is variable. So we want to make sure that the plants are going to have a good start to establish roots. So here are some photos just to give you examples of what all these steps look like. Here we have a garden that was laid out and sprayed on the ground with some green spray paint you can see. We have some youth here that we have grubbing. So basically they're sticking those shovels under and flipping up clods of dirt and grass to be used for a berm. Here we have the excavation process, which is a lot of moving lots and lots of soil. We have laying out plants. Now, laying out plants is, I think, a really fun process because when you go into a garden design, of course, you have your plan that you set forth and you have an idea of where everything's going to go. But then when you get to the site day of, sometimes you have more of one plant than you ordered or less of another. Sometimes you need to move things around depending on like changes you had to make day of during the installation. So it's really variable, and it's kind of an art form in itself to like figure out where everything fits nicely and is going to look best and function best. And then we have planting, which is always exciting. Mulching. And then the installation of the splash pad, which you can see in the back towards the middle. You can see where the flex pipe is coming out of the ground onto a rocky area. And what this does is it helps break up the flow of water as it's coming off your roof into the downspout and then out the flex pipe. And what that does is it prevents any erosion within the garden itself and allows the water to kind of evenly spread across the garden to infiltrate. Downspout disconnection. So downspout disconnection is super important. It is essential to the function of the garden. If we didn't disconnect the downspout, the rain garden would have no purpose other than just functioning for beauty. And so what we do when we disconnect the downspout is if the downspout is connected to a standpipe like pictured here, I don't know if you could see it, but towards the foundation, there is a painted gray metal pipe coming out of the ground. That standpipe connects directly to a sewer system. So if it's connected to a standpipe, we're going to cut the downspout, what's coming off the house, just above the standpipe and install an elbow or flex pipe. We're going to measure the diameter of the standpipe and then cap it. The reason we do that is because we want to prevent any additional water infiltration into that sewer system. We're trying to prevent the water from ending up in that sewer system and have it exclusively going into the garden space. If there's no standpipe, we use the correct elbow or flex pipe to reach the rain garden. We run additional gutter, flex pipe, or PVC to reach the garden if needed. This can either be buried, as I mentioned, we would dig a trench and kind of seed it in the trench or over the land. And we always make sure that the run from the downspout to the garden is pitched downhill. Doesn't have to be a huge pitch downward, but it needs to be at least a slight one because water is naturally going to run downhill. We won't want to make sure that there's no low points within the run of the slope, because then if you're using flex pipe and you have a low point within the run of the slope, you're going to get the flex pipe bending and dipping into that slope, and then you'll get pooling within the flex pipe. And then my favorite part of this presentation, which is expect the unexpected. I feel like last year's installations were a set of trials and tribulations for sure. And you never know when you're going to get a surprise under the ground. A prime example is this space that we planted on James Street. We went into this installation knowing full well that there were approximately 18 inches of mulch on the site. And we were told that the mulch was there because the soil was so-so quality. What we didn't expect was when we got through the 18 inches of mulch, we hit what can only be described as someone's attempt at making concrete by throwing down a mixture of lime, sand, and water. So we got through the mulch and we hit essentially solid concrete. So I don't know if you can see in the picture, but behind the wheelbarrow, that giant pile that gentleman is digging into, that is all broken up concrete. So we had to break up the concrete before we were able to get to soil that was of quality enough to dig into to plant things. Even then, we did have to amend soil for this installation. And Nicole, correct me if I'm wrong, but this was what, a 10-hour day? And it was 90 degrees. So it's hard work. It is backbreaking sometimes. It is hard work. But, you know, in the end, it ends up being really rewarding. And you'll see a bit of that later on in our slides. Sometimes we also have to deal with, you know, weather and pool issues. The garden on the left was a space that was a COVID casualty. Through various reasons, it came to many sundry uses, we'll say. And we are in process of revitalizing that space now as a sensory and dye garden. And this is just an amazing picture of some great youth from Junta for Progressive Action helping us replant that space last summer. And we just went to the space recently and all the plants are starting to come up and they all look really happy. And the space looks cleaner and healthier than it did before, which is the end goal. However, that is the space that did take out my poor trusty trowel, as you see on the right. It was the sad tool casualty for the day. And then we also have some garden installations that, you know, we anticipate the weather going one way and it goes completely another, like the picture in the middle where you see Nicole laughing at me with mirth as I get casually waterboarded by the rainfall. We did not expect it to pour down rain. And by the end of that install, it was basically a torrential downpour, but we still had to get that disconnect done. So you see me pictured laying on my back, drinking the rain while attaching some pipe holder to the house to hold up the PVC. And then this is what makes the process the most rewarding. So this series of pictures that you see here is all the same location. This is start to finish, one day. It started out as that picture on the far left. And then you see the picture on the top right, which is immediately after the garden was grubbed and all the sod was removed. And then you see the garden bottom right. I want to say, Nicole, probably a couple months later, once it had time to establish. So this is just a little peek at the potential of these spaces to beautify your yard. And an additional benefit to having a beautiful planted space is you have a lot less lawn to mow, which is a perk for sure. On the topic of maintenance, there is some maintenance that does have to be done when you have a rain garden. When you first install a rain garden, of course, there's going to be some weekly watering that needs to be done. If you're getting a lot of rain in any given stretch of time, you shouldn't need to water. But if you have a particularly dry stretch, you should be watering at least an inch of water within your garden space for like once a week for the first few months that your plants are there. Keep an eye for any erosion, remove weeds and invasive species. And this watering is really essential to allowing those plants to establish themselves if there's little to no rain in a season. Long-term maintenance is quite simple. It's probably a couple times a year, 2 to 3 times a year, I would say at max. You want to remove dead branches from the trees and shrubs, remove any dead vegetation seasonally, prune shrubs as needed, do some light weeding, refresh the mulch if you need to. You might need to do that like once a year. Clean out the downspout entrance. I would say try to do that at least twice a year because you never know what like debris is coming off of your roof or falling from trees in the area. But you want to just make sure that your garden is able to function optimally. And most important in this presentation, because I assume that everyone here is interested in rain gardens in general. If you happen to be a resident of New Haven or Hamden, specifically Fairhaven, New Hallville, Dixwell, Dwight, Mill River, New Hall, or South Hamden, we are working on a program right now where we are trying to install a grand total of 40 residential rain gardens in those areas. We have until the end of October, so we are still looking for properties for this spring for installations. So if you meet the parameters of geography for this, please feel free to scan the QR code on the screen and apply for a rain garden. We would come out and do that assessment process that we spoke about earlier on in this presentation. But it's a really hands-on process with the homeowner. And because it's your garden at the end of the day, you have to look at it every day. You get a lot of say in what goes into that space. So it's a really like hands-on, we work with the homeowner type of process. If you're interested, you can scan that QR and that'll bring you to our application, or you can send me an email. My email is listed below. And I think that that's everything. We have some work cited for Claire's amazing work.
Gonna say, I'm just gonna leave these up for a minute so people can read them, and I think we can take questions.
Yeah.
And feel free to, excuse me, feel free to unmute yourself if you do have a question about this or any comments.
Hi, this is Jackie Acri-Garofalo. I think it's awesome what you guys are doing. One of my massive pet peeves is, doing neighborhood walks, and literally 85% of lawns have the yellow poison signs, herbicide sprayed, whatever. Do we know what percentage of that does end up in our rivers and streams and sewers and stuff like that, based on, it looks like, most people get like weekly sprays or sometimes monthly sprays, whatever? Is there any kind of things to track how much that's implicating things?
Sorry, my audio broke up for a minute. Can you just say that last part again?
Sorry, I was just wondering if there's any studies as to, how much of the pesticides that people are spraying on their lawns end up in our water systems.
There are a lot of studies. There's several researchers out of Yale that have been looking at that for the past several years. I believe, what is it, Nick the Neonates?
Yeah.
That's been working, and I think they have some studies on their website. We can also get you some. There's a lot of correlations between land use and runoff, and kind of what actually makes its way in there. Makes its way into the stormwater runoff. So I don't have specific numbers. There's also monitoring that's been done like downstream of outfalls, looking at different chemicals that are coming out of them, as well as kind of the impacts to fish populations. So we know that there's a strong correlation. I don't have the studies or the numbers off the top of my head for you though.
No, that would be great. I want to write like an op-ed, because I feel like people are like, oh, it's just the organic ones that we're spraying or whatever. It's like, this is still getting into our water supply. It's still hurting everything around it. Okay.
I did get a direct message question that I think is applicable to maybe some other people on this call. The question was, would you work with condo associations, or is your current program only for single family homes? The answer to that is, it really does depend on how much buy-in we get from the condo association and ensuring that there is someone who would be responsible for maintenance. We will work with renters so long as the homeowner is on board. But it's by no means relegated to exclusively single-family homes.
On Jackie's question about runoff of the applications on lawns too, I was just going to add that it varies greatly. It'll be interesting to see studies, but depending on, how concentrated it's applied and the timing of the application, we know that if they apply it right before rainfall, most of it's going to run off. And if they apply it in a dry stretch, much more of it will sit on that lawn and sink in, and less of it will run off when it does rain. So a lot of it has to do with when and how much. So there's a lot of variables, and there's better ways to do it, and certainly worse ways to do it.
Thank you.
There's not other questions. I'd like to give a big shout out to both Lys and Claire. They've both been working really hard on this project over the last, well, Lys has been working on it for the last year and a half, and Claire really kind of jumped in at the end. And had hoped to get a rain garden installed before the end of her project in April. And for the record, Claire will still be installing a rain garden, or at least will still make the opportunities available, even though her program ends the end of the month. But it's really been a pleasure to see how both of them have picked those up.
Yes, I'm very excited to work with you guys still and continue implementing rain gardens and learning about them.
Sorry, I did just have one other question that was in the chat. It was just, it's Jackie again being annoying. I was just wondering if there's any movement toward, like, is there a way to get this implemented in the state so that, any new developments or new houses or whatever would automatically have these sorts of gardens installed with them?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, we should have, first of all, a slide that we should have included is that our rain garden program has been funded by a state 319 grant, which is EPA money. So there's a lot of support from the state to help with small scale green infrastructure and education opportunities. As far as stormwater runoff, it's a municipality by municipality basis. So each town has their own stormwater regulations. And so I know I can speak to both Hamden and New Haven have requirements that they have to capture at least the first inch to inch and a quarter of rain for any new development. And a lot of municipalities tie their regulations to substantial improvements as well. So not just new development, but big redevelopments of properties. And so if you're looking to kind of change that within your own towns, I think one of the biggest things you can do is get involved in local politics. Or in kind of local commission hearings saying that these are things you'd like to see changed within your zoning laws.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thanks. And if you have a few minutes to stay on, there's a couple more questions in the chat. Starting with Kristen Foster asked, thank you for the site assessment steps. Can you explain the step with the shovel over the whole part again? Is that to measure the depth of the water remaining at each time check?
Do you want to take this one? And I'll stick the guidance.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, it's meant, the reason why the shovel is in the hole is so that you have like a marker of how much the water has dropped over time, which allows you to calculate like roughly how many inches per minute are being infiltrated into the soil.
So I imagine a yardstick would work too, right?
Yes,
But the shovel
absolutely.
the shovel's in hand.
Yes,
So, and then
precisely.
Richard Warren asked, is New Haven and Hamden area focused because of particular grant funding? Will you try to expand to other town areas?
So the New Haven Hamden focus area is based on a couple of factors. Namely, we determined this was initially funding that was communities that were at higher environmental risk. This was determined utilizing a CDC environmental justice risk map. And so that was one of the factors that was used to determine what areas were addressed with this funding. However, an additional factor that was utilized was areas that are affected by CSO or combined sewer overflows. Not a lot of people are familiar with what CSOs are. A quick overview, so we don't have to get real into it, is essentially a CSO is a system of sewer management that allows gray water and sewage from residences, commercial businesses, etc., and stormwater to infiltrate into the same system. So all of that water goes through the same system, is processed by the same water treatment plant, etc. On a day like today, when it's beautiful and sunny, that water, that sewer system functions the way it should. It all goes to the water treatment plant, it's processed, and then it's discharged after being processed. Where we get into trouble is when we have large-scale storm events, which are now happening more and more frequently and of more and more severity. And it's almost like somebody flips a light switch. And so the sewer has a finite capacity for inundation. When you hit that capacity, the switch flips, and anything beyond that point is going to be discharged untreated directly into our water bodies. So, for example, there's outfalls in like West River, there's outfalls in the Mill River. All of that is then going to be untreated sewage being discharged and eventually finding its way into Long Island Sound. It's the reason why if there's a heavy rainstorm, you're not supposed to go shellfishing, because we get increased levels of bacterial coliform in the water, increased levels of E. coli. So this is the bigger piece of why we're targeting specific areas. We did talk about literally today, potentially expanding into other areas. It's a case of finding the funding and sourcing the community interest for these spaces to be cultivated and maintained properly, because Save the Sound has the capacity to advise. We have the capacity to facilitate some of this process, but long-term stewardship has always been something that has been a difficulty because we just don't have the staff capacity for it. So if you know of any neighborhoods that are really interested in some residential rain gardens, it can't hurt to explore the option and gather names. I didn't see if there were any other questions. I don't know, Anne, if you saw any additional ones.
Yeah, there's a few thank yous in there. Phenomenal presentation. Thank you, Nicole, Claire, and Lys, for presenting this vital information to improve water and quality of life overall. That's from Jacqueline. And then Kristen specifically thanked you for directing people to look into your local stormwater management committees. They shared that my town has a relatively new one and that I haven't accessed yet. So yeah, getting involved with your local stormwater management, is a great suggestion. And thank you all for sharing the information today, and thank you to you all who joined. And I hope we see lots more rain gardens sprouting up throughout the Long Island Sound watershed. Have a great rest of the day. Thanks.
Thank you.